Hi, this is Joanne Pittman. Welcome to ChinaSource Conversations. And today we're going to be talking with Dr. Scott Callaham about his new book called Sacred Characters, Daily Readings from the Chinese Bible, published in 2025. Scott, this is another one of your books that I picked up and I said, I wish that had been around 30 years ago when I was learning Chinese. So welcome, Scott, and it's nice to see you again. And before we talk about the book, I wonder if you can tell us more about who you are and what, besides writing books, keeps you busy.
Well, it's great to be back. Thanks so much for the welcome again, and it's wonderful to engage with the China Source audience once again. So again, I'm Scott Callaham, and I have been in Chinese ministry for a really long time in life. In 2011, God called us to go to Asia and to serve the Chinese church, and that was such a life-changing calling that life change is going to continue for the rest of our lives, in addition to learning Chinese. So that kind of, I'm answering more than one question at a time here, I think. So at that time of trying to take on learning this really difficult language, I kind of noticed that ministry purposes language learning frequently looks exactly like secular language learning. Like you learn how to say your name, you describe your family. And if you're like me, you actually have the benefit of a university language course that I went to in East Asia for 3 years, full-time language learning. And I needed that because the objective was to go to Singapore and teach in a Chinese seminary on the Chinese faculty. And so God gave that opportunity at last. I mean, these are years passing in this process, right? So got to teach in Singapore at a Chinese seminary for 6 years. And during that time, I had the opportunity to write an earlier Chinese book, which is the Chinese edition of my Aramaic textbook. So this is the Aramaic of the Bible. It's one of the 3 biblical languages. And I always wanted it to be available for the Chinese audience and got to do that. And then the next Chinese book, which is the one we've talked about before, has to do with during that time teaching these dear Chinese brothers and sisters, these church leaders from the mainland and other places. God just decided to enable me to compose Chinese worship music. And so the students and I together in collaboration, we kind of honed that into 41 that got into the book, published Chinese worship songs. And the point is congregational singing. It's modern hymns. And the idea is these are for worship, and they're filled with Bible and theology. And normally the Bible, that the expressions that go into the worship songs are from the He He Button, with the Chinese Union version, which is sort of the standard Chinese Bible, because it made its impact in a time of sort of the formation of the worldwide Chinese church. So a lot of the Christian expressions, the language, the turns of phrase come from the way that they were rendered in the He He Button. And of course, just like with English or other languages, there are other Chinese language versions of the Bible. There's an official Catholic version of the Bible that is different. It's a high quality translation. And there are more modern language translations that are easier to understand for the contemporary audience now in the 21st century. But there's a classic feel to the He He Bun, where the language of the He He Bun continues to make its presence known in prayer, in singing, not just my songs, but in popular Chinese worship music. And so one of the resources that I had always hoped would be available, but was not, was a means of learning Christian Chinese in parallel with my other Chinese language learning, because as we all know, Chinese is hard for a native English speaker,
Very,
right?
yeah.
I mean, there are really no points of contact, and having to reorient your mind towards listening for tones and producing them correctly is a really significant part of Chinese language learning, for instance. And what about Chinese characters? that sets Chinese learning on a whole new level of difficulty compared to many other languages that perhaps use the same alphabet as English. So for all of that difficulty, as a Chinese language learner is struggling through and doing their best and making all kinds of humorous mistakes along the way, the infusing of that learning with spiritual meaning is something that just sort of had to happen along the way in interactions with tutors, for instance, in talking about the hope we have because of Jesus Christ. It just had to sort of just happen, right? Mm-hmm. I wanted more than that, but there really were not that many resources available. So kind of in the back of my mind, in the course of that initial full-time language learning, as well as my teaching time, because you're always learning, right? And language learning is a process of thinking differently, mm-hmm. because the whole way you're expressing yourself, especially with different sentence structure, different presentation of ideas, the semantic range of words are different than their glosses might suggest, all these kind of things. During that time, I would have liked to have had a resource like this book. So years ago, I thought, wouldn't it be great to have alongside any program of Chinese language learning, a devotional on the Chinese Bible? Because this is giving us our Chinese language, right? Our turns of phrase from the he he bun. Mm-hmm. And it can be patterned off of similar devotional resources, say, for the biblical languages. Mm-hmm. So these exist for biblical Hebrew, biblical Aramaic, biblical Greek, where there's a short reading every day, where you have, for example, a nice English translation, perhaps even one you're familiar with, and then you have this other language. Mm-hmm. And in this inductive learning kind of way, you're picking up this other language. Even if you're in a formal course, mm-hmm. with a lot of deductive learning, memorizing vocabulary lists and so forth, you're getting this inductive learning. And because it's the Word of God, it's mm-hmm. speaking to you in a different way than just some secular conversation that you're kind of mapping out its meaning. So I wanted something like this. It just didn't exist before. And if you think about this book we're talking about, Sacred Characters, which came out this year, to explain who it's for people, and because the meta language is English, okay, English speakers, right? Mm-hmm. It's for people who are learning Chinese. Okay. And they want this to be a spiritual experience in addition to a linguistic experience, a language learning experience, sure. where they're interacting with the Chinese Bible. So who are these people, right? Right. Obviously Christian workers overseas, right? Like I was, but also there are huge numbers of people in the diaspora Chinese churches, if you think about it. Mm-hmm. So what am I talking about? Well, outside of traditionally Chinese speaking areas. Sure. That includes where we lived for a long time in Singapore, mm-hmm. where you have churches where it's not monolingual Chinese, even though that's perhaps the main language, but you have plenty of people in these churches whose main language, their primary language, the language that they pray in, mm-hmm. and mostly express themselves in, it might be English, but they want to have more and more Chinese knowledge. It's just not their primary, mm-hmm. right? And they need some help, just like I did, to get that Christian language, because every language has sort of a Christian way, right, to express yourself.
Christianese in all of the different languages.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just how it is.
Right, and you have to learn it.
Yeah, there's a vocabulary set, right? And beyond that, there are these turns of phrase that are mostly biblical, right. that we kind of assume sometimes people know who are not Christians, but they're like, what are you talking about? That's Christianese right there. So to pick that up, a great way to do that is to do Bible reading. And so this is an entry point into the Chinese Bible. It's not a textbook. Mm-hmm. It's the daily devotional. Yeah. And so I always wanted to do that, and I never had a chance until this year, because I had to kind of clear off a queue of really time-sensitive projects. And something I realized is I pretty much knocked out one of these per year. So last year, for instance, we finally got the Chinese edition of my missions textbook, which is called World Mission,
Yes.
Theology, Strategy, and Current Issues. And I'm so grateful to ChinaSource for hosting a review of it recently. So that came out in paper form last year. And it's also available on Logos. So it's not bound to paper, but it's nice to hold it in your hands, right?
Yeah.
And then this year, Sacred Characters.
Okay. Let me ask another question here. The structure of the book is 365 devotionals. Each devotional is basically just one verse. You know, one verse or maybe two verses.
Right.
Where you have the verse and then you pull out the Chinese in English and then in Chinese, and you pull out the Chinese language, the vocabulary, and then notes on the phrases and all of that kind of thing. So you have 365 days, and you're wanting to introduce, you know, Chinese, like you say, turns of phrases. How did you decide? How did you decide which 365 verses
Yes.
include in this book? Because we know the Bible has more than 365 verses. How did you select those verses?
Well, there's some goals that it's kind of like an engineering problem. You have compromises between all of your goals to achieve the desired effect. So one of the goals was to get readings throughout the Bible. So 3rd John, Obadiah, they appear. Every book in the Bible appears, and then in a somewhat matching their size kind of way. So Genesis is big, Psalms is big, that kind of thing. And then roughly to give about half of the book to the Old Testament and half to the New Testament, which is important because the Old Testament is a really significant part of the Bible, and it doesn't normally tend to get its full play that it should. So those were some of the design parameters, but also there are plenty of more obscure words that didn't need to really have the focus put on them. And so the focus is on the selected vocabulary words for each day. So there are 2 highlighted vocabulary words each day, which if you need to go back and work on them, there's a handy index in the back of what you've studied already, you know, for these vocabulary words. And the selection of the vocabulary words was to try to say, what are these important words that, and in some cases it's a short phrase that a Chinese learner would want to know. And there's plenty of other learning along the way inductively. And the footnotes reflect that, about there's something in the verse that cries out to be talked about that wasn't in the nature of this is a vocabulary word. You know, so I mean, for example, just so people understand what we're talking about, there's a New Testament verse where Jesus is in a boat. So there's a folk etymology about Chinese characters that suggests that Chinese characters kind of freeze in time from ages past Bible stories, especially stories from Genesis, as a cultural memory. And that Chinese has therefore preserved in a miraculous way these Bible stories. Well, for those who study Chinese in depth, that's kind of a head scratcher, because it's like, well, why would Chinese do that and other languages wouldn't? Well, the answer, these are pictures, right? So you don't need a big, long story. You've got pictures. Well, so I use that opportunity with the boat word to kind of show this is kind of the premier example of this folk etymology. So I just kind of showed that that's really not a good use of your time to try to discern Bible stories and Chinese characters, unless in your context, it's just an interesting way to remember something and to show it to a Chinese person. So that might be some sort of use, but I mean, you could come up with that yourself because it just hits you in your Chinese learning. So it's that kind of thing where I hope to clarify language issues. Like I remember there's a really unexpected use of qing, what is normally a question word, and it does not appear that way in one of these verses. So there's a note for that to kind of explain from the language learner's perspective. You know, if your native language is Chinese, you're like, oh yeah, I knew that. But the language learner's perspective, what is that word doing there?
Right.
That's what these notes are for.
Right. Because every character most characters have multiple meanings. You know, so it's like, well, which is the meaning here? So.
Well, and I try to point out
Yeah.
there are some significant characters that have more than one pronunciation.
Yeah.
And sometimes the pronunciation is merely a tone difference.
Yep.
And so there are times, I'm sure, where a native Chinese speaker will hear you use the wrong tone and go, okay, I know what he's talking about.
Right.
But you start to compile those and you have 3 or 4 tone errors in a sentence, and that just causes the hearer to lose you. So this is to help with that precision about I'm choosing the right tone of this same character, right? The right tone for this context.
Yeah. Scott, where can somebody get this book? Is it Amazon? Is it, yeah, tell us where we can get it.
Okay, so like my other books, they are available on Amazon and big bookstores. Sure. So if you must, type in Scott Callaham, but make sure that you don't have an automatic spell change to Callahan.
Okay, Callahan.
So the M is important, but it would help my wonderful publisher, Glossa House, if you go to glossahouse.com and order it there. And I can announce, if someone sees this soon, before the end of the year, there is a coupon code for 40% off.
Oh, okay.
So it's XMAS for Christmas, 40% off. So XMAS 40. And so Sacred Characters, my devotional in the Chinese Bible, actually is $12. That's half what it is on Amazon at glossahouse.com.
Okay, wonderful. Well, Scott, it's been great to talk to you. Once again, thank you for writing a book, like I said, that I wish had been around 30 years ago when I was learning Chinese. And I will do what we can to get the word out, and pray that God blesses many people because you wrote this book.
And thank you so much. And it's all in the spirit of what's in the introduction, where we're praying for God to do great things and to bring great blessing to the world through the Chinese church. So the people who are the readers, hopefully, of this book are those who are part of what God is doing with the Chinese church.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much.